Hello. This week my book is called Voice of Fannie Lou Hamer, Spirit of the Civil Rights Movement. It is by Carol Boston Weatherford, illustrated by Akua Holmes. It's published by Candlewick Press. It was copyrighted in 2015. It's a nonfiction picture storybook. There's 41 pages, and it would be for 10 years and up. So this book is about an African-American woman, Fannie Lou Hamer. It starts off from the point of view of Fannie, and as a young child. So she kind of sets the stage for the readers to understand what her childhood is like. She talks about she's the youngest of 20 children. She was born into sharecropping, which she says is a nicer way of saying slavery. She talks about how when she was 6 years old, she started picking cotton. Her family was really poor. She was really good at school, but she had to quit in 6th grade. She was also taught by her mother to be a proud black woman and never to be ashamed of being black. So her family worked really hard, and eventually her parents bought some livestock. Well, the neighbors didn't like that, and the neighbors poisoned the livestock. They didn't like the idea of the blacks getting ahead in life. So when Fannie was 22 years old, her father passed away, and most of her family moved up north. But Fannie stayed back to take care of her mom, and she just couldn't stand the thought of her mother being in a nursing home. She eventually married Perry Hamer, or they called him Pap. She joined him at another plantation. He worked in the fields and drove a tractor, and she canned produce. They also took over Fannie's father's juke joint and sold bootleg liquor. Fannie was also the timekeeper at the plantation, and she would check the hours worked and deal with the scale, and she said her boss would rig the scale sometimes, but whenever she could, without him noticing, she would use her own scale so that people weren't getting gypped out, because he was gypping people what they deserved. In 1954, Fannie and her husband adopted 2 girls, and then in 1961, Fannie had to have surgery to cut out a small tumor, or so she thought. But when she woke up, she found out that they took out more than just a small tumor. They removed her reproductive organs, so she was no longer ever able to have children of her own. This was a law at the time in Mississippi. It was stating that poor folks had no business making babies. In 1962, Fannie had learned about her right to vote. She had to take a test in order to register to vote. She didn't pass the test initially, but later retook it and passed it. But before she could vote, she had to pay a poll tax, and she didn't have money to pay that, so she wasn't able to vote. She joined a group known as SNCC, or SNCC, which stood for Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She was considered a leader in the college world. She went to a citizenship school. And on her way back home from that school, they stopped at a restaurant and tried to order food at the whites only counter, and the police were called, and she was taken to jail. And at the jail, she was beaten, like brutally beaten. she was just treated horribly, and the police really had no explanation, no charges, nothing to explain what they were doing. Because of these beatings, she suffered horribly. She couldn't walk right. She just suffered really badly. Later, she ran for Congress in the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Her and two other black women were the first black women ever to sit in Congress on the House floor. They spent a lot of their time registering thousands of black Americans to vote. And Fannie went on to do many other things as a black women's advocate. In 1967, her daughter became sick and eventually passed away, and so Fannie and her husband had to raise her two grandbabies. Fannie was just an amazing black woman. She fought for the rights of the whole black community. She achieved so many different things during her life. And she eventually received a Lifelong Service Award from the Black Congress people of the Congressional Black Caucus. She felt for a long time that she wasn't accomplishing much with the black rights, but after she received this award, she felt like maybe she had won after all. And that's kind of how the story ends. The story has some pretty cool pictures. They're like almost like cutouts, like paper cutouts, and kind of abstract, I guess I would say. They're pretty cool. I'm not sure how exactly to explain them, but yeah, they look like papers cut out and layered on top of each other. This one, I like this one a lot. And then we've got this. So I think this book is great for children to understand the work that Black Americans put in to get the Black community to where they are today. I think there are still things that we need to work on, but I think it's great for children to really understand what life used to be like and what life is now and what life could be. The book describes in great detail the pain and suffering that Black Americans had to endure, and I think it would be a good book to share during Black History Month to educate students on the life of a Black women's activist, someone who fought really hard, not only for herself, but for the Black community, just as a whole. For this book, I would have a lesson during Black History Month, like I said. I would have students pick an influential African American from history and do some research on them. Just kind of a little bit about their childhood, what it was like growing up, their parents, their siblings, the struggles they faced as African American child, what life was like growing up, what life was like as a young adult. Did they get married? Who did they marry? Did they have any children? And what it is that they did to be so well known in history. And then I would have the kids do a presentation on their person, and they would dress up like that person and present themselves, their person, to the class and tell us who they are and what they did based on their research. So they would kind of have to work on their public speaking skills as well. So that's, I think that would be a good activity for students to really understand not just what Fannie went through, but what a lot of Black Americans went through, and they could really put themselves in their shoes and even, actually dress up like that person and really feel like that person.